Proper blockbuster epics like The Lord of the Rings or the Dark Knight films are stretched out across a trilogy, raking in big bucks for the studio year after year after year. But not all of these trilogies manage to fully materialize. The tagline for 2010's remake of Clash of the Titans was, "Titans will clash," which does an excellent job of summing up both the plot of the movie and what the filmmakers thought of the flick's target audience. Despite this, the film did okay at the box office and earned not as awful as expected reviews. A sequel was immediately announced, and then a third part announced before that sequel was even released.
One day, somebody's gonna have to make a stand. One day, somebody's gotta say enough.
2012's Wrath of the Titans underperformed at the box office, pulling in only $83 million domestically, about half of what the original managed. Despite having been announced back in 2011, the final part of the trilogy was put on hold indefinitely. By 2013, a producer went on record saying he couldn't see Titans 3 happening without fresh ideas. It's John Carpenter's gritty, weird 1981 ode to a city he apparently hated, a tale in which New York has become a giant prison and only Kurt Russell is man enough to punch his way in there to save the president. Yeah, Escape from New York is a B-movie, but what a B-movie it is.
What you doing in here with a gun, Snake?
Looking for somebody.
Who?
The president.
By the 1990s, Escape was a cult classic crying out for a sequel, so Carpenter announced 2 new chapters, Escape from LA and Escape from Earth. But 1996's Escape from LA bombed harder than any movie featuring Kurt Russell surf-chasing Steve Buscemi has any right to. Nevertheless, Carpenter and Russell tried to get their trilogy's capstone finished. It nearly became a TV series, then an anime movie. Escape from Earth is officially dead. Conan was the 1982 film that introduced us to Arnie's bulging pecs, turning the Austrian muscle man into a global star despite his super thick accent.
Crumb, I've never prayed you before. I have no tongue for it.
That's all you need to know to understand the fate of the Conan trilogy, which would have seen 1984's sequel Conan the Destroyer followed in 1987 by a final entry. Sadly, for fans of Arnold in a loincloth, 1984 was also the year a little movie called The Terminator was released. The idea of any B-movie being able to afford Arnie after that was unlikely, to say the least. Fast forward to 2016, when Conan 3 seemed like a sure thing with the post-politics Arnold hyping the project, but the studio ultimately decided to can it in April 2017. Yes, there are already 3 Divergent films, but the trilogy is technically incomplete. The third film, Divergent Allegiant, is only based on the first half of the final Divergent book. Just like the Harry Potter series sliced Deathly Hallows into 2 parts, Summit Entertainment decided to turn the Allegiant book into 2 films, Allegiant and Ascendant. But Ascendant never took off.
What's going on here?
They're shutting us down.
After breaking box office records with 1989's Batman, director Tim Burton and star Michael Keaton returned 3 years later with Batman Returns, a movie that hinted at more adventures to come. In 1995, those adventures dutifully arrived, only now they were a neon-drenched debacle fronted by Val Kilmer, directed by Joel Schumacher, and featuring a bright green Jim Carrey chewing the scenery. What happened? Burton's trilogy was ultimately sunk by its controversial and underperforming middle part. Sure, Batman Returns received positive reviews and was a box office smash, but it didn't perform nearly as well as the first film. And it was widely criticized in the press for being too dark and violent for kids, damaging McDonald's Happy Meal sales.
Now you can get a Batman car and a McDonald's Happy Meal. There's Catwoman's Coupe, Batman's launching Batmobile, or the Penguin's Roadster. 1 toy with each Happy Meal you buy.
So Warner Brothers chucked Burton, Keaton left, and the final part of the trilogy was replaced by 2 ridiculous Schumacher films. What would Burton's Batman 3 have looked like? Billy D. Williams, who played Harvey Dent in the '89 Batman, was set to play Two-Face. He finally got the role in 2017's The Lego Batman Movie. Marlon Wayans was cast as Robin in Batman Returns, but he was left on the cutting room floor. Industry rumors suggested Robin Williams was meant to play the Riddler, and Michelle Pfeiffer would return as Catwoman. Would it have been any good? Well, it couldn't have been much worse than Batman and Robin.
I'll finish off the city. You kill the kids, but leave me the bat.
On paper, the Millennium trilogy must have looked like the surest bet in showbiz.
Hollywood movies based on the mega-selling books by Swedish author Stieg Larsson? Directed by David Fincher, the genre-hopping talent behind Fight Club and Seven? Shirtless Daniel Craig?
Shut up and take my money!
The first Millennium movie, 2011's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, managed to pull in $223 million off a $90 million budget, enough to prompt talk of a sequel. There were still 2 books left unfilmed in America at the time, and a Fincher-directed and Craig-fronted Girl Who Played with Fire and Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest would surely generate a tidy profit. But Sony claims Craig wanted too much money to reprise the role of journalist Mikhail Blomkvist for 2 more films. At one point, they considered completing the trilogy with a different lead. Then they ditched Fincher too, and talk of a trilogy went out the window. Not many people know that Roman Polanski's 1974 masterpiece Chinatown already has a sequel. In 1990,
Jack Nicholson reprised the role of grizzled PI Jake Gittes in The Two Jakes,
a sequel that failed to live up to the quality of its predecessor in just about every way.
This town, I'm the leper with the most fingers.
But had The Two Jakes been a box office hit, it would have paved the way for a full-on trilogy.
Gittes vs. Gittes would have seen Nicholson's detective taking on a monopoly controlling access to the LA freeway while also going through a messy divorce.
Unfortunately, The Two Jakes bombed so hard that screenwriter Robert Towne gave up on the idea of Part 3 altogether. The never-filmed third and final Timothy Dalton James Bond movie was conceived as a way of capping the actor's involvement with the franchise. It would have given Dalton's Bond a big send-off while indulging in the themes that made his previous 2 outings so distinct.
According to Charles Helfenstein's The Making of the Living Daylights,
it was known in pre-production as Bond 17 and got as far as the scripting stage. The plot involved a British-Chinese megalomaniac threatening to unleash a worldwide computer virus unless the British returned Hong Kong back to China. Bond 17 stayed on the table right up until 1994, when Dalton got tired of waiting and simply quit the role.
Then you have my resignation, sir.
We're not a country club, 007.
Bond was recast with Pierce Brosnan, and Bond 17 became GoldenEye. Perhaps it's just as well. Within 2 years of GoldenEye's release in 1997, Hong Kong was returned to China in the real world, with nary an evil megalomaniac in sight.
Director Matthew Vaughn brought indie comic series Kick-Ass to life on the big screen in 2010.
With Aaron Taylor Johnson starring as the namesake hero. Praised for its adult themes, Kick-Ass received positive reviews from critics and managed to become a modest box office success, prompting Universal to move forward with a sequel. Directed by Jeff Wadlow, Kick-Ass 2 was released in August 2013 to not-so-kick-ass reviews. Although the film was a decent commercial success, it failed to perform as well as the first film. Shortly before the release of Kick-Ass 2, creator Mark Miller confirmed plans for a third movie that would largely depend on how much money the second movie made. In 2015, Bond said he'd have to make a Hit Girl prequel before tackling Kick-Ass 3, but don't hold your breath. Hit Girl herself, Chloe Grace Moretz, says poor box office numbers doom the trilogy, and she's, quote, done with the character. In the wake of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Harry Potter films, studios were scrambling to find the next big fantasy epic. New Line almost found it in his Dark Materials, a grim atheist fantasy series by British writer Philip Pullman that had set the literary world alight a decade earlier. It had battles, baddies, school children sprinting through spectacular set pieces. In a post-Potter world, it seemed a surefire success. And it might have been, if the first film, The Golden Compass, hadn't managed to anger just about everyone. Fans were outraged that New Line tried to water down the book's anti-religion themes, while religious organizations were outraged by the diluted leftovers of those same themes. Fox News even claimed that it was part of that year's War on Christmas, because of course it did.
Religion has been a source of peace, of serenity, of happiness, and I don't understand why militant atheists wish to take that away from kids.
It also didn't help that New Line forced the creation of a cliffhanging, gotta watch the sequel ending in an attempt to milk money right out of viewers' pockets. So it's no big surprise the film made barely $70 million at the domestic box office against its $180 million budget. The global box office added an impressive $300 million, but the damage had already been done to its reputation. The poor reviews and bad box office killed this trilogy as dead as the series' own god.
Director Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy 2: The Golden Army was released in July 2008, 4 years after the modestly successful original. It also wasn't a monster hit, so Universal Pictures never commissioned a third installment. 2 years after Hellboy 2 was released, Del Toro told Rotten Tomatoes he was interested in potentially making another Hellboy movie. 2 years after that, star Ron Perlman donned his full Hellboy costume to visit a terminally ill child. That bit of kindness inspired Del Toro to push for another film, telling Entertainment Weekly, "I can say publicly that now we are together in trying to do Hellboy 3. But nothing ever happened. Perlman said if Hellboy 3 were to happen, it would need to be twice as big as the previous 2 installments, which Del Toro said would cost around $120 million to produce. No studio was willing to put up that kind of money for a franchise that likely wouldn't crack $500 million. In January 2017, Del Toro polled Twitter users on whether they wanted Hellboy 3, got positive feedback, then had a couple meetings about it. But by February, it was all over. Del Toro tweeted that 100% the sequel will not happen, and that is to be the final thing about it.
Give it up, pal. It's over. I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Meanwhile, the lousy performance of the 2019 Hellboy film from director Neil Marshall and star David Harbour is a further sign Del Toro's trilogy isn't likely to ever finish. In 2015, Sony Pictures suspended plans to continue the Andrew Garfield-led Amazing Spider-Man franchise and instead opted to share the character with Marvel Studios. Tom Holland took over as Spidey in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a rebooted Spider-Man film series. But what were Sony's original plans? Before the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in 2014, Sony planned to launch an extended Spider-Man franchise to compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was going to include 2 more Amazing Spider-Man films as well as spin-offs featuring Venom and the group of villains known as the Sinister Six. Sony also hired Lisa Joy Nolan to write a script for a female superhero movie set in their Spider-Man universe, but nothing has come of it. 5 years after 28 Days Later hit theaters, the sequel, 28 Weeks Later, arrived, depicting a NATO takeover of the UK, supposedly quelling a zombie infestation. Unfortunately, one person infected with the virus survived and spread it to the remaining survivors. At the end of the movie, some survivors escape England and make it to France. One of those survivors was still a carrier, though, and the movie's cliffhanger showed zombies running rampant in front of the Eiffel Tower. 28 Days Later, director Danny Boyle indicated plans for a third installment were in the works. Unfortunately, screenwriter Alex Garland believed the rumored 28 Months Later movie wouldn't happen due to copyright issues, saying, "When we made 28 Days Later, the rights were frozen between a group of people who are no longer talking to each other." Boyle still wants to make a third movie, and he even has some ideas for what it would entail. He has declined to share any of his ideas for fear of them popping up in The Walking Dead, but Boyle and Garland are both up for making the third installment if the rights hurdles can ever be cleared. 20th Century Fox's first Fantastic Four movie starring Ioan Gruffudd, Jessica Alba, Chris Evans, and Michael Chiklis as the titular heroes released in 2005 to mixed reviews. However, fan anticipation led Fantastic Four to become a box office success, earning over 3 times its production budget. Director Tim Story and the rest of the cast and crew all returned for the 2007 follow-up, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. That one received mixed to negative reviews and performed slightly worse at the worldwide box office. Those mediocre box office results made Fox hesitant about immediately pursuing a sequel. But there was hope, at least for a little while. All 5 of the main cast members, including Julian McMahon, who played Dr. Doom, signed 3-picture deals. They were also interested in making another movie and diving deeper into the Fantastic Four mythos. Although Story was keen to make 2 more films, Fox put an end to the series. In 2008, Evans, who later famously became Captain America, said the franchise is, quote, a closed book.
So I guess this is it. We all go our separate ways.
Fox attempted to reboot the Fantastic Four in 2015, but the result was a badly received film directed by Josh Trank. Just a few short months prior to Kill Bill hitting theaters, director Quentin Tarantino and Miramax concluded that the 4-hour film would have to be split into 2 releases. Although they aren't his most commercially successful films, the 2-part Grindhouse homage has become a cult hit in the years since. The second film ends pretty definitively with Bill dying and Beatrix and Bibi leaving together. However, Tarantino believes there's always room for more. In 2004, he indicated plans to make a third Kill Bill with Uma Thurman, reprising her role as Beatrix Kiddo. But Tarantino said he would probably wait around 15 years before making another one. Tarantino said the story would potentially focus on, quote, the revenge of 2 killers whose arms and eye were hacked by Uma Thurman in the first stories, or a daughter's revenge story. But nothing ever came of either idea. In 2012, Tarantino finally conceded it probably wouldn't happen. And in February 2018, Thurman called Tarantino out for making her drive a car too fast while filming, ultimately crashing and injuring herself. Don't expect them to work together again anytime soon.
You and I have unfinished business.
Baby, you ain't kidding.
Romancing the Stone was the sleeper hit of 1984, thanks in no small part to stars Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner having instant on-screen chemistry. Fox was so impressed, it immediately rushed out a sequel, The Jewel of the Nile. Although Nile did well at the box office, it was reportedly hell to make. Den of Geek reports that neither Turner nor Douglas wanted to do the picture and only agreed after Fox threatened to take them to court for breach of contract. But easy money is easy money, and it wasn't long before Douglas announced that a final chapter, The Crimson Eagle, would soon be released. IGN notes Douglas quit his role in 1997's U-571 to focus on it. In 2008, The Telegraph reported a retitled version was preparing to shoot in India, with his wife, Catherine Zeta-Jones, taking over from Kathleen Turner. It would have been the first proper Hollywood and Bollywood co-production had it not vanished into development hell. By 2011, the talk was about a remake of the original, which in turn was replaced by a TV series that also seems to have now dropped off the radar. Zack Snyder was the driving force of the DCEU at the start, directing Man of Steel in 2013, followed by Batman vs. Superman in 2016, before teaming up with Joss Whedon for 2017's half-dark, half-goofy, all-flop Justice League. After 3 critical maulings plus worse-than-expected box office, DC canceled all remaining plans for Snyder-fronted movies. But according to Kevin Smith's Fat Man Beyond podcast, Snyder was apparently planning a whole Justice League trilogy. Smith talked to many people involved with the planned trilogy. He claims Part 2 would have introduced the Green Lantern and intergalactic villain Darkseid, who would have defeated the League, arrived on Earth, and killed a significant percentage of its population. Sound familiar? Part 3 would have seen the League regroup and return to Earth, finally defeating Darkseid. Speed was a sleeper hit in 1994. The movie about a bus equipped with a bomb that would go off if it dipped below 50 miles per hour set the box office alight and proved that Keanu Reeves was a bona fide action star. It also seemed to prove that people really wanted to see vehicle-based action movies. Well, that theory proved to have several holes in it after the debut of Speed 2: Cruise Control, a movie about a bomb on perhaps the least exciting, least speedy of all vehicles, a cruise ship. The Keanu-less Speed 2 sank. Speed wasn't originally planned as a trilogy, and despite Speed 2's dismal box office and critical performance, it wasn't long before rumors of Speed 3 began floating around. As late as 2008, Den of Geek reported Reeves was set to return to the franchise, giving it the send-off it deserved. Although a treatment made its way onto the internet, the proposed Speed capstone never made it to production. The young adult book series Percy Jackson and the Olympians is about a teenage boy who discovers he has the powers of a demigod. The movie series Percy Jackson is a cautious morality tale about what happens when a bunch of producers discover they can make serious money, ruining books for everyone. The first Percy Jackson movie, The Lightning Thief, did well enough to warrant a sequel, Sea of Monsters. Although the second movie received a mixed critical response, a third installment was still greenlit. Nothing came of that film, titled The Titan's Curse. As early as 2014, star Logan Lerman was saying he thought it was unlikely that the series would ever be completed, so his Percy Jackson ship has probably sailed for good.